Imagine being a soldier who believed he was stationed in the most powerful fortress in the world, only to discover he was wrong in the most terrifying way possible. June 6, 1944, just past midnight. Omaha Beach, coast of France. A young German soldier named Gerrit Heinrich Severin carefully cleaned the barrel of his machine gun inside a concrete bunker facing the English Channel. This bunker was basically a small fortress of cement with narrow firing slits. In his pocket, he carried a letter from his girlfriend, who had promised to wait for him until the victorious end of the war. 3 days earlier, he had written confident words. "The invasion will be their grave. We'll throw them back into the sea within hours." He had said this after Field Marshal Rommel, the supreme German commander of the area, nicknamed the Desert Fox for his victories in Africa, had personally inspected their positions. Rommel had looked through Severin's firing port, studied the overlapping fields of fire, and nodded in satisfaction. "When they come, this beach will be their cemetery," he had said. Through the opening, Severin saw only peaceful darkness over the channel. The night was calm, almost serene. In 12 hours, that same young man would be found sobbing uncontrollably in his bunker, surrounded by 13,500 empty shell casings, the barrel of his weapon warped from extreme heat, staring at an invasion force so immense that his mind simply refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Though Severin would later claim to have inflicted between 1,000 and 2,000 enemy casualties, historians consider this impossible, given that total American losses on Omaha Beach from all causes were approximately 2,400. The mathematics of the German defeat were about to be written, not in strategic or intelligence reports, but in the shocked testimonies of soldiers who would witness the greatest amphibious invasion in human history from the wrong end of the gun. The Atlantic Wall stretched 2,400 kilometers from Norway to the Spanish border. German propaganda called it the most formidable defensive line in military history. Along the coast of Normandy, 58 divisions, large military groups numbering thousands of soldiers, occupied positions that had consumed 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1,200,000 tons of steel. The defensive preparations on Omaha Beach alone seemed to justify such confidence. The Germans had built 8 concrete bunkers, 35 small fortifications called casemates, 4 artillery positions, 18 anti-tank gun positions, 45 rocket sites, 85 machine gun nests, and 6 mortar pits. Mortars are weapons that fire shells in an arc, like throwing something over a wall. The beach itself had been turned into a killing field. 3,700 obstacles had been planted in the tidal zone, including Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, metal structures with spikes in all directions, and wooden stakes, many topped with anti-personnel mines. Behind the beaches, 6.5 million mines had been buried, though Rommel had wanted 60 million. Colonel Ernst Goth, commanding a German regiment near Bayeux, a French town, had calculated the defensive firepower in his sector. His 4 batteries, groups of artillery guns, could theoretically fire 120 shells per minute toward the beach sectors. Combined with other batteries, the Germans could concentrate massive firepower on any landing attempt. These calculations, however, assumed unlimited ammunition, an assumption that would prove fatally wrong. June 5th had brought weather that German meteorologists in Paris had declared impossible for an invasion. Winds of 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, waves nearly 2 meters high, and low clouds. Using data from submarines and weather stations, they had assured the High Command that conditions would remain poor for at least 2 weeks. Based on this forecast, many senior officers had left their posts. Rommel himself had departed for Germany on June 5th to celebrate his wife's birthday, taking with him a pair of grey suede shoes he had bought in Paris. General Dollmann, commanding the German 7th Army, had ordered his division commanders to attend military exercises. Even the naval patrols that normally watched the channel had been cancelled due to rough seas. This meteorological confidence would prove to be Germany's first major miscalculation. Unknown to the Germans, the Allies, that is, the United States, Great Britain, and other nations fighting against Germany, had weather stations in Greenland and reconnaissance flights over the Atlantic that detected a brief break in the storm. A 36-hour window identified by British meteorologist James Stagg, which Supreme Allied Commander General Eisenhower seized upon. At 11:15 p.m. on June 5th, German radar stations along the Normandy coast began to detect unusual activity. The operators, however, had seen this before. Allied deception raids designed to keep German forces on alert. But at 12:30 a.m. on June 6th, reports began flooding the system, defying all assumptions. Enemy paratroopers were landing across Normandy. Yet the reports made no sense. Some units reported paratroopers to the east, others to the west. Some said they were British, others American. Dummy paratroopers fitted with firecrackers, part of the deception operations, added to the confusion. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a panzer regiment, a German tank unit, was among the first to grasp the gravity of the situation. Awakened by reports of paratroopers landing near his positions, he immediately requested permission to counterattack. The divisional headquarters replied, "Do not move until the situation becomes clear." Von Luck would later write in his memoirs, "I knew at that moment we were lost." The paratroopers were clearly marking the flanks for a landing. Every minute we waited gave them time to consolidate, yet we remained paralyzed by our own chain of command. June 6th, 5:30 in the morning. As the first grey light began to illuminate the channel, German observers in forward positions began reporting something their training had never prepared them for. From horizon to horizon, a sea covered with ships, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Vessels of every size and description, from massive battleships to small landing craft, stretching across the channel like a grey carpet. The invasion fleet consisted of 6,939 vessels, according to official Allied records. 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 auxiliary vessels, and 864 merchant ships. It was the largest naval armada ever assembled in human history. For the German defenders raised on propaganda about Allied weakness, the sight was psychologically devastating. A German artillery officer, who would be killed that same day, reportedly told his men they were witnessing the entire world coming to their doorstep. At 5:35 in the morning, the naval bombardment began. Nothing in the German defenders' experience, neither the Eastern Front nor the heaviest bombings of the British Royal Air Force, had prepared them for what followed. The American battleship Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells, massive rounds 35 centimeters in diameter, in 34 minutes. The cumulative bombardment of the naval force exceeded anything the German army had previously encountered. According to German veterans' testimonies, concrete bunkers designed to withstand any bombardment cracked under naval fire. Men were buried alive, dug out, and buried again as shells continued to fall. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. These fortifications, in which they had placed absolute trust, crumbled like sandcastles. As the naval bombardment continued, the response of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, revealed the true desperation of the German position. German pilot Josef Priller, commanding a fighter squadron, received orders to attack the invasion fleet with full force. His recorded response in the war diary was, "What full force? I have 2 aircraft." The Luftwaffe, which had promised air superiority over any invasion, managed only 319 sorties on D-Day against 14,674 Allied sorties. Priller and his wingman carried out the only Luftwaffe attack on the beaches during the morning of June 6th, strafing a beach once in their fighters before fleeing from overwhelming Allied air cover. This single strafing run by 2 aircraft against an invasion force of thousands became a symbol of German impotence. The once promised knights of the air, who were supposed to darken the skies over any invasion, had been reduced to a futile gesture. At 6:30 in the morning, the first assault waves hit the beaches. The German defenders, despite the bombardment, manned their positions and opened fire. What followed was carnage that shocked even hardened veterans. Heinrich Severin, the machine gunner in the bunker, began firing at 6:35. His position, one of the few not damaged by the bombardment, commanded perfect fields of fire over Omaha Beach. He fired 13,500 rounds over 9 hours. His MG-42 machine gun, firing at a rate of 1,200 rounds per minute in short bursts, contributed significantly to what became known as Bloody Omaha. The German defenders began to experience what military historians would later call material shock, the mental collapse caused by confronting overwhelming force. It didn't matter how many Americans, British, or Canadians fell. More kept coming. Every landing craft destroyed was replaced by 3 more. Every silenced machine gun position was crushed by seemingly limitless naval fire. By noon, German positions began reporting critical ammunition shortages. Defensive plans had calculated ammunition expenditure based on repelling a limited assault. No one had planned for an attack of this scale. Positions stocked for a 3-day battle exhausted their supplies within hours. Artillery batteries faced similar crises. Attempts to bring in reserves failed. Every road was under constant attack by Allied fighter bombers. The contrast with Allied firepower was stark. German observers noted that American destroyers would fire hundreds of shells at individual targets, while German artillery was rationed to 4 shells per gun by the afternoon of D-Day. The German Armored Reserve, the force Rommel had insisted must defeat any invasion on the beaches, remained paralyzed during the critical morning hours. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit near the beaches, did not receive orders to attack until 10:00 in the morning, 4 hours after the landings had begun. When it finally attacked at 4:20 in the afternoon, it advanced between British airborne landing zones toward the coast. It reached the shoreline around 7 in the evening, the only German armored unit to reach the coast on D-Day. However, by 9:00 that night, they witnessed the arrival of 250 gliders bringing reinforcements to the British 6th Airborne Division. Interpreting this massive airborne armada as a threat to their flanks, they withdrew. The division lost 54 tanks and armored vehicles on D-Day, roughly 25% of its strength in a single day. The counterattack also encountered specialized Allied armored equipment they had never seen before. Tanks modified with rotating chains to clear mines. Throughout D-Day, German units faced a threat they had never encountered on such a scale: massive airborne forces operating behind their lines. The British 6th Airborne Division and the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions created chaos that multiplied their real strength. Friedrich von der Heydte, Germany's most experienced paratroop commander, was in Normandy during the invasion. His professional assessment was devastating. The Allied airborne operation was everything ours never was: massive, coordinated, and well-supplied. We dropped battalions, groups of about 1,000 men. They dropped entire divisions, 10 to 15,000 soldiers. We were supplied by individual planes. They had endless streams of gliders and transport aircraft. The psychological impact of paratroopers appearing everywhere paralyzed German responses. Units refused to move, fearing ambushes. Others fired at shadows, sometimes at their own men. Confusion multiplied the German problems exponentially. As D-Day progressed, German command and control disintegrated. Allied aircraft systematically destroyed communication lines. The French resistance, activated by coded messages from the BBC, cut telephone cables and destroyed relay stations. Radio communications were jammed by Allied electronic warfare units. General Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the German 7th Army, tried to coordinate the defense from his headquarters. His war diary recorded growing frustration as contact with forward units vanished. By noon, entire divisions had disappeared from the communications network. Individual unit commanders were making decisions in isolation, unaware of the overall situation. When darkness fell on June 6th, the surviving German defenders took stock of their situation. The supposedly impenetrable Atlantic Wall had been breached in multiple places. The Luftwaffe had essentially ceased to exist over Normandy. The German Navy had managed to sink 1 destroyer while losing 15 fast attack boats and numerous smaller vessels. General Richter, commanding the 716th Division, which had borne the brunt of the British assault, reported to the 7th Army headquarters. Combat strength of the division at 35%, all coastal strongpoints lost, artillery 90% destroyed, enemy advancing inland. The statistics told a story of complete tactical failure, despite individual acts of heroism. In a single day, German forces had suffered casualties equivalent to those of a major battle, while the Allies continued landing fresh troops as if D-Day were only the beginning, not the climax. During the night of June 6th to 7th, German units attempted to regroup and counterattack. These efforts revealed the full extent of Allied superiority. Every German movement was detected by radar, illuminated by flares, and destroyed by artillery or naval gunfire. Hans von Luck's Panzer Grenadiers, finally released to counterattack, advanced toward the beach in darkness. According to his memoirs, they were immediately illuminated by parachute flares and subjected to devastating fire from destroyers offshore. "It was like daylight," he wrote. "Every vehicle, every soldier was visible. The shells came from the sea with perfect accuracy. We lost half our force without seeing a single enemy soldier." Meanwhile, Allied reinforcements kept landing. The artificial Mulberry harbors were already being assembled. Supply ships anchored in organized rows. The invasion was not only succeeding, it was transforming into a permanent presence. When German reinforcements tried to reach Normandy, they encountered complete interdiction of movement. Every road, railway, and bridge was under constant attack. Units that should have reached the front in one day took up to 2 weeks. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, stationed near Toulouse, took 17 days to reach Normandy, a journey that should have taken 3. They arrived, having lost 30% of their vehicles to air attack, without firing a single shot at ground forces. The psychological impact was devastating. If they couldn't even reach the battlefield intact, how could they hope to influence it? Meanwhile, Allied logistics operated with astonishing efficiency. Landing ships unloaded entire armored regiments within hours. Within days of D-Day, the Allies were landing 15,000 tons of supplies daily, more than the entire German army in Normandy consumed in a week. By June 12th, German forces in Normandy were nearing psychological collapse. They had lost 26,000 men, killed, wounded, or missing, roughly equivalent to 2 full divisions. Replacements were minimal. Meanwhile, the Allied force grew stronger every hour. The town of Carentan fell on June 12th, linking Utah and Omaha beaches. German paratroopers, elite troops who had never before retreated, fell back in disorder. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heydte, reported to higher headquarters, "My regiment no longer exists as a fighting unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." On June 13th, tank commander Michael Wittmann achieved one of the few German tactical victories in Normandy. He destroyed between 13 and 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and between 13 and 15 personnel carriers at the Battle of Villers-Bocage in 15 minutes. German propaganda clung to this victory as proof that German weapons could still prevail. But even this triumph revealed the futility of the German position. Wittmann's Tiger tank, a powerful German heavy tank, was disabled in battle and replaced only with great difficulty. The British losses were replaced within hours. The tactical brilliance of individual German soldiers could not overcome industrial mathematics. Wittmann himself, credited with destroying 138 enemy tanks on all fronts, was killed on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed. The greatest tank ace of the German army was eliminated by an enemy that could afford to trade 10 tanks for 1 Tiger. The fall of Cherbourg on June 26th delivered another psychological blow. This major port, fortified for 4 years and garrisoned by 21,000 men, was expected to hold out for months. It fell after 5 days of serious fighting. General Schlieffen, commanding the garrison, had proclaimed he would defend Cherbourg to the last bullet. Instead, he surrendered on June 26th. In his post-war interrogation, he explained that resistance had become meaningless against the enemy's unlimited resources, a theme that would echo throughout German accounts of Normandy. Operation Cobra, beginning on July 25th, delivered the coup de grâce to German forces in Normandy. The preparatory bombardment involved 1,533 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers, dropping more than 4,100 tons of bombs over a concentrated area, only 6,400 meters wide and 2,280 meters deep. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding a panzer division, reported, "My division is annihilated. The psychological effect on the survivors is indescribable. They are no longer soldiers but broken men." The bombardment was so intense that it killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer, to die in the European theater, who had been observing from what was thought to be a safe distance. If American generals were not safe from their own firepower, what chance did German soldiers have? The Falaise Pocket, from August 12th to 21st, became the graveyard of German forces in Normandy. Approximately 10,000 Germans were killed in the pocket and 50,000 were captured. More than 300 tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed, along with 2,500 other vehicles. German soldiers attempting to escape described scenes of apocalyptic destruction. The roads were carpeted with dead horses and burning vehicles. Allied fighter bombers attacked in waves every 20 minutes. Artillery fire fell continuously. The systematic destruction was so complete that many soldiers simply surrendered, preferring captivity to certain death. The final tally of the Normandy campaign tells a story of complete German defeat. German losses from June 6th to August 31st totaled approximately 320,000 casualties, 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, and 210,000 missing or captured, 2,300 tanks destroyed, virtually all the armor in France, and 2,127 aircraft lost. Allied losses amounted to roughly 210,000 casualties, with replacements exceeding losses daily. About 4,000 tanks lost and replaced within weeks, and 4,111 aircraft lost out of a force exceeding 13,000. The disparity revealed a fundamental truth. Germany was fighting a war of attrition it could not win against an enemy with virtually limitless reserves. Professional German officers provided the most objective assessments of the disaster. General Eberbach, who took command in Normandy after Rommel was wounded, reported on August 1st. The enemy AS material superiority is at least 20-1 in artillery, 10-1 in tanks, and absolute in aircraft. He can replace all his losses in days. We cannot replace anything. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, wrote in his 1949 memoirs, "Normandy proved that courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy. We faced an enemy who had mechanized not only war, but victory itself." Field Marshal Erwin Rommel left the most powerful testimony of the Normandy experience. In his final report to Hitler on July 15th, 2 days before he was severely wounded by Allied aircraft, he wrote, "The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. The overwhelming superiority of the enemy in men and material is beginning to tell. I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay." This was military language for total defeat. Rommel, Germany's most celebrated commander, was telling Hitler that the war was lost. The Normandy campaign revealed that the Second World War had become a war of production. German soldiers witnessed American industrial capacity that defied comprehension. Ford's Willow Run plant alone produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. American factories produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944. Allied ammunition expenditure in a single day exceeded German monthly production. One American division consumed more supplies daily than an entire German corps. Hans von Luck, reflecting on Normandy in his memoirs, wrote, "We learned that modern war was not about tactics or courage. It was about production. The Americans had turned war into an industrial process. They manufactured victory on assembly lines." German soldiers who survived Normandy were psychologically transformed. They had witnessed the total invalidation of everything they had been taught about warfare, racial superiority, and national destiny. Heinrich Severin, the bunker machine gunner, spent the rest of his life haunted by his D-Day experience. In his 2005 memoir, He wrote about meeting American D-Day veterans. "We all realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 bullets meant nothing against their limitless replacements." Friedrich von der Heydte, the paratroop commander, became a professor of international law after the war. He wrote, "Normandy taught us that the age of warrior heroes was over. War had become a matter of industrial capacity, and we had challenged the greatest industrial power in the world with horses and outdated dreams." From the German perspective, D-Day was not simply a military defeat. It was a complete ideological and psychological collapse. Soldiers who had conquered most of Europe discovered that everything they believed about their enemies, their cause, and their capabilities was catastrophically wrong. They had expected to face weak, divided democracies. Instead, they encountered an alliance that had transformed war into an industrial process of overwhelming efficiency. They witnessed the arsenal of democracy in action: ships, planes, tanks, and endless supplies flowing from factories whose capacity exceeded all German understanding. The German defenders of Normandy learned that modern war was won not on battlefields, but in factories, not by the bravest soldiers, but by the most productive societies. They discovered that the Western Allies had revolutionized warfare, turning it into a mathematical equation where production statistics mattered more than tactical brilliance. Heinrich Severin began June 6th, believing the invasion would be repelled within hours. He ended it surrounded by thousands of empty shell casings. Watching endless waves of Allied reinforcements land on the beach his position was meant to control. His experience embodied the greater German tragedy in Normandy: tactical success drowned by strategic impossibility. The beaches of Normandy became not just a battlefield, but a revelation. German soldiers witnessed the future of warfare, and it belonged to societies that could produce more materiel and apply it more efficiently. They had brought courage, training, and determination to battle. The Allies brought unlimited industrial production. In trying to stop the Allied invasion, the German defenders might as well have tried to stop the tide itself. They fired until their gun barrels melted, fought until their ammunition was gone, and watched as the Allies simply brought more of everything. The mathematics of modern war had rendered their courage irrelevant. The German soldiers who faced D-Day learned the hardest lesson in history. In the age of industrial warfare, nations that could not match the production of their enemies were doomed to defeat, no matter the skill or sacrifice of their soldiers. They began June 6th as warriors of the Third Reich and ended it as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in its terrifying total efficiency. Their defeat was not merely military, it was absolute. A crushing demonstration that the Nazi vision of racial superiority and military dominance had collided with the reality of Allied industrial supremacy and shattered completely. The invasion they had sworn to drive back into the sea instead swept them away, carrying with it the last illusions of German victory. But here's what's truly astonishing. Decades later, when German and Allied veterans gathered on those very same beaches, something extraordinary happened. Heinrich Severin, the young machine gunner who had fired 13,500 rounds on that terrible day, came face to face with American veterans who had landed under his fire. Instead of hatred, they found mutual respect. Severin confessed that he had spent 50 years tormented, not for having fought, but for the utter senselessness of it all. The American veterans told him something that moved him to tears. "We were just young men doing our duty, just like you." This mutual recognition revealed a truth deeper than any statistic of battle. Both sides had been victims of decisions made by distant leaders. Both had shown extraordinary courage. Both had endured unimaginable horror. The German soldiers who defended Normandy were not monsters. They were young men trapped in a lost cause, fighting with a bravery even their enemies acknowledged. And the Allies who landed that day respected the determination of those defenders, even as they fought to destroy the regime they represented. Friedrich von der Heydte, the German paratroop commander, wrote something profound years later. "When I look back at Normandy, I no longer see enemies. I see other soldiers who, like us, were doing what they believed was right. The difference was not in our courage, but in our causes, They fought to liberate, we fought to occupy. That is the distinction history will remember. Veterans from both sides came to understand that they had shared more with each other than with the generals and politicians who had sent them into combat. They shared the trauma of watching friends die, of facing incomprehensible terror, of surviving when so many others had not. At veteran reunions in the years that followed, Germans and Allies exchanged stories, not with bitterness, but with the peculiar camaraderie of those who had passed through the same hell. A British veteran of the Normandy beaches said in a 1990s interview something that perfectly captures this reconciliation. During the battle, they were the enemy. After the war, we realized they were just young men like us, caught in the machinery of a war none of us had started. Their bravery in defending impossible positions against impossible odds deserves recognition, even if their cause does not. This is perhaps the most important lesson of D-Day from the German perspective. It is not merely a story of an army's defeat. It is a story of how courage exists on both sides of any conflict, of how humanity can persist even amid the most brutal war, and of how former enemies can become friends when they recognize their shared humanity. The German soldiers of Normandy proved that one can fight bravely, even in a wrong cause, that duty and honor can exist apart from the morality of the war itself. And the Allied soldiers proved that one can respect the courage of an enemy while fighting to destroy the system he represents. Today, the beaches of Normandy are places of remembrance, not hatred. The monuments honor the fallen of both sides. German veterans have been welcomed at commemorative ceremonies alongside their former foes. The families of fallen German soldiers visit their loved ones' graves in cemeteries cared for with the same respect as the Allied ones. This transformation from mortal enemies to respectful friends is the true triumph of D-Day. It proves that even after the most devastating conflict, reconciliation is possible. That mutual respect can rise from battle, that recognizing another's courage does not mean approving of his cause. Heinrich Severin spent his final years no longer haunted by hatred, but devoted to peace, speaking to young Germans and Allies about the horrors of war and the importance of never repeating it. His message was simple, yet powerful. I saw what happens when nations become enemies. Dedicate your lives to ensuring that our countries always remain friends. The German soldiers of Normandy taught us that bravery knows no flag, that suffering makes no distinction of uniform, and that true victory lies not in destroying the enemy, but in transforming enemies into allies. Their story reminds us that behind every soldier is a human being, and that recognizing that humanity is the first step toward a world at peace. And here is the final twist that will make you think. Those same German soldiers who once swore to defend Europe against the Allies to their last breath, 25 years later were fighting shoulder to shoulder with American, British, and French soldiers as allies in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, defending together the very same values of freedom and democracy for which the Allies had landed in Normandy. Because the greater story was never about who won on June 6, 1944, but about who they all became afterward.